The candle on Blythe Vernon's ledger guttered and spat, sending shadows dancing across the grim columns of figures that refused to balance no matter how many times she recalculated them. Her fingers, stained with ink and numb from the December cold that crept through every crack in the small shop's walls, trembled as she set down her pen. The numbers told an unforgiving story. 3 weeks until the creditors would arrive. Perhaps less if Mr. Wickham grew impatient. The bakery that had been her father's pride, her mother's joy, and her own desperate salvation was dying by degrees. Outside, snow began to fall on the quiet village street, settling on the window panes like a funeral shroud. The scent of unsold gingerbread mingled with the acrid smoke from the fireplace, where the last of the coal fought a losing battle against the winter chill. Blythe pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders and reached for the pot of tea that had long since gone cold. There had to be something she had overlooked, some expense she could cut further, some miracle she could conjure from sheer determination alone. The shop door opened without warning. My beautiful family, if you are already enjoying this story, I want you to hit that subscribe button now, because this story is one that you do not want to miss. Like and share because someone out there needs this tale of love and romance. Don't walk away from stories that make you feel this much emotions. No bell had rung, no footsteps had approached. Yet suddenly the doorway was filled with a figure so imposing that the humble space seemed to shrink around him. The Duke of Vane stood framed by falling snow, his greatcoat black as midnight, his expression carved from granite. Blythe had never seen him before, yet she knew him instantly. Everyone within 50 miles knew of the wealthiest, most formidable peer in the county, the man who controlled half the land and every whispered rumor of power. She rose instinctively, her chair scraping against the floorboards. Your Grace, the shop is closed. I am not here for bread, Miss Vernon. His voice was deep, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him with deliberate precision, his pale eyes sweeping over her modest establishment with the detached assessment of a man appraising property. I am here with a proposition. Blythe's spine stiffened. She had heard enough propositions from creditors and charitable busybodies to last a lifetime. I'm afraid I cannot help you, Your Grace. As you can see, I have little enough to manage my own affairs. Precisely why I am here. He moved closer, and she noticed the perfect tailoring of his coat, the gleam of his boots, the crisp white of his cravat. Everything about him spoke of wealth so absolute, it was nearly obscene in her shabby surroundings. He stopped before her counter, separated from her only by the scratched wood and the vast gulf of their stations. You are in debt to the amount of £300. Your lease expires in April. You have no family support beyond an ailing aunt in Bath and a younger sister who depends entirely on your charity. Heat flooded Blythe's cheeks. How dare you? I dare because I have made it my business to know. He spoke as if reciting a report, his gaze never wavering from hers. Your father died 18 months ago. You have attempted to maintain his business despite having no legal right to the property and no experience in commerce. You are, by all practical measures, weeks from complete ruin. The words struck like physical blows, each one true, each one devastating. Blythe gripped the edge of the counter, fighting the hot sting of tears. If you have come here to catalog my failures, Your Grace, I assure you I am intimately acquainted with them already. Good evening. I have come with an offer. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, placing it on the counter between them with the finality of a judge's gavel. Marry me by the new year. In exchange, I will clear all your debts, secure a lifetime income for you and your sister, and provide a suitable residence. The marriage will be one of convenience only. I require a wife for reasons of estate management, not companionship. You will have your own quarters, your own staff, and complete financial security. Blythe stared at the document as if it were a serpent. You cannot be serious. I am never anything but serious. His expression remained implacable, betraying nothing of what could possibly motivate such madness. This is a business arrangement, Miss Vernon. I need a wife who will not harbor romantic delusions or social ambitions. You need financial salvation. It is a practical exchange. The sheer audacity of it left her momentarily speechless. She looked up at him, this powerful stranger who had invaded her shop and reduced her entire life to a transaction, and felt something fierce and bright kindle in her chest. No. For the first time, something flickered across the Duke's features. Surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. I beg your pardon? I said no. Blythe drew herself up to her full height, which brought her barely to his shoulder, and met his cold gaze with all the pride her mother had ever taught her. I will not marry you, Your Grace. Not for £300, not for 3,000, not for all the security in England. I may be desperate, but I am not property to be purchased. The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You are refusing me? Yes. Her voice rang clear in the small shop, steady despite the wild hammering of her heart. I am refusing you. Now please leave my establishment. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out, retrieved the document, and returned it to his coat with movements of rigid control. You are making a grave mistake, Miss Vernon. Perhaps. Blythe lifted her chin. But it will be my mistake to make. The Duke turned without another word and strode to the door. He paused on the threshold, snow swirling around his boots, and looked back at her one final time. In the candlelight, his face was all sharp angles and shadow. I hope your pride keeps you warm this winter, Miss Vernon. You will have precious little else. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a decisive click that echoed like a death knell in the silence. Blythe stood alone in her failing shop, surrounded by debts she could not pay and a future she could not secure, and wondered if she had just sealed her own fate with her stubborn refusal. The night after the Duke's departure, Blythe lay awake in the narrow bed she shared with her sister Charlotte, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and wondering if she had lost her mind. £300. The sum circled endlessly through her thoughts like a bird of prey. With £300, she could pay Mr. Wickham, renew the lease, purchase proper coal for the ovens, buy Charlotte new boots to replace the ones she had outgrown months ago. With £300, she could breathe again. Instead, she had chosen pride. Charlotte stirred beside her, murmuring something incoherent before burrowing deeper beneath the threadbare quilts. At 15, her sisters still possessed the ability to sleep through worry, though Blythe had worked hard to keep the worst of their troubles from her. Charlotte deserved a season, pretty dresses, a chance at the kind of match their mother had always dreamed of for her daughters. Not this slow descent into genteel poverty, not a future measured in pennies and prayers. Yet even as doubt gnawed at her, Blythe could not bring herself to regret her refusal. The Duke had looked at her as if she were an acquisition, a solution to a problem he would not even deign to explain. A wife for reasons of estate management, he had said, as if she were no different from hiring a new steward or purchasing better livestock. The memory of his cold eyes made her pull the blankets higher, though no amount of wool could ward off the chill of his disdain. She had built something here, however modest. Her father's bakery might be failing, but it was failing on her terms, through her efforts. To simply hand herself over to a stranger, to become another possession in his vast collection of holdings, would be to surrender the very thing that made the struggle worthwhile. Her mother had not raised her to be bought. Morning brought no answers. Only frost so thick on the windows that Charlotte had to scrape it away with her fingernails to peer outside. The village was hushed beneath a blanket of fresh snow. The street empty save for the baker's boy making his rounds 3 doors down. Blythe dressed quickly in the frigid air and went downstairs to tend the ovens. Though she had precious little to bake and fewer customers expected in such weather, Charlotte appeared an hour later, her dark hair braided and her cheeks pink from the cold. She had wrapped herself in Mother's old shawl, the blue one with the careful darning at the hem, and she carried the last of the tea. "You were tossing all night," Charlotte said, settling herself on the stool by the counter. "Bad dreams?" "Something like that." Blythe accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "I've been thinking about Bath. Aunt Marjorie wrote again last month, asking if you might visit her for the season." Charlotte's expression brightened, then dimmed just as quickly. "We cannot afford the coach fare. Perhaps by spring, Blythe." Her sister's voice was gentle but firm, too knowing for her years. "You needn't pretend with me. I know how bad things are. I see the letters you hide, the way you calculate figures late into the night." She reached across the counter and took Blythe's hand. "Whatever happens, we shall face it together. I don't need seasons or fine dresses. I only need you." The simple declaration made Blythe's throat tighten. This was what she fought for, not the shop itself, but the right to protect her sister, to face their troubles as a family rather than as dependents on some stranger's charity, even a stranger who happened to be the wealthiest duke in the county. "We shall manage," Blythe said, squeezing Charlotte's fingers. "We always do." 10 miles away, at Vane Hall, the Duke stood before the windows of his library and stared out at the same falling snow with an expression of barely controlled fury. She had refused him. The words still rang in his ears with the absurdity of a bad joke. In 32 years, Gareth Vane had never been refused anything. Not by business associates, not by Parliament, certainly not by penniless shopkeepers on the verge of complete financial collapse. He had offered her salvation, security beyond her wildest imaginings, and she had looked at him with those infuriatingly proud eyes and said no. "Your Grace?" His secretary, Mr. Pembroke, hovered at the library door with the day's correspondence. "The contracts for the Sheffield property require your signature, and Lord Ashford has written again requesting an audience. Burn Ashford's letter." Gareth did not turn from the window. His cousin's increasingly desperate attempts to insert himself into the estate's business had grown tiresome. The man was circling like a vulture, waiting for any sign of weakness, which was precisely why Gareth needed a wife, and quickly. The old Duke's will had been quite specific about the conditions of inheritance. "And the Sheffield contracts, Your Grace?" "Leave them." Gareth dismissed the secretary with a wave. He needed to think, to plan. Miss Blythe Vernon was a complication he had not anticipated. He had chosen her precisely because she seemed sensible, practical, desperate enough to accept a mutually beneficial arrangement without the hysteria of romantic expectation. Instead, she had proven to be as stubborn as she was impoverished. The snow was falling harder now, blown sideways by winds that howled around the hall's ancient stones. Gareth watched the storm gather strength and felt a similar tempest building in his chest. He was not accustomed to obstacles, and he did not accept defeat. If Miss Vernon thought her refusal was final, she understood neither the stakes nor the man she was dealing with. He had given her time to reconsider, to feel the weight of her debts and her pride pressing down until one or the other broke. But time was running short. Ashford was already spreading rumors about Gareth's unmarried state, already positioning himself as the presumptive heir. The new year was a fortnight away. Gareth turned from the window and strode to his desk. He would give Miss Vernon until Christmas Eve. If she had not come to her senses by then, he would go to her himself and make her understand that this was not a matter of choice. It was necessity. And the Duke of Vane always got what he required. Outside, the storm intensified, blanketing the countryside in white and severing the roads between village and estate like a blade. Christmas Eve arrived with a silence so profound, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Blythe had risen before dawn to prepare what meager holiday offerings she could manage. A small plum cake baked with the last of her hoarded sugar, a wreath of holly and ivy for the door. Candles saved throughout the year for this one night of warmth and light. Charlotte had gone to the church to help with the decorating, leaving Blythe alone to close the shop and prepare their modest celebration. The day had brought no customers, which was both expected and quietly devastating. Blythe had spent the afternoon tidying shelves that held more air than product, sweeping floors already clean, doing anything to avoid calculating how many days remained before Mr. Wickham's patience expired entirely. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tonight, at least, she would allow herself to set aside worry and simply be grateful for what remained. Her sister's laughter, their small home, their freedom. She was just reaching for her cloak when the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The door flew open with such force it banged against the wall, admitting a gust of wind so cold it extinguished half the candles in a single breath. Snow swirled into the shop like an invading army, and through it stepped a figure she had convinced herself she would never see again. The Duke of Vane filled her doorway like an avenging angel, his greatcoat dusted with snow, his dark hair windswept, his pale eyes blazing with barely restrained fury. He did not wait for invitation or greeting. He simply entered, slamming the door behind him with a finality that made the remaining candles flicker. "Your Grace," Blythe began, shock stealing the strength from her voice. "I require an answer tonight." His voice cut through the small space like a blade through silk. "I do not take no for an answer, Miss Vernon." Heat flooded through her, burning away the initial surprise and replacing it with indignation. "Then you have wasted a journey in terrible weather, because my answer has not changed." "Your answer," he said, advancing toward her with measured steps, "is the result of pride and foolishness. I have been patient. I have given you time to reconsider. That time has ended." "Patient?" Blythe's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You appeared in my shop without warning, offered to purchase me like a horse at auction, and call yourself patient? You know nothing of patience, Your Grace, or humility, or basic human decency, it seems." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping only when the counter separated them, the same counter where he had made his calculated offer a week ago. "You stand in a failing shop, wearing a dress that has been turned twice, burning candles you can ill afford, and you speak to me of foolishness. I am offering you salvation." "You are offering me servitude dressed in silk." Blythe met his gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "A gilded cage is still a cage, Your Grace. I will not trade my freedom for your convenience, no matter how desperate my circumstances." "Your freedom?" He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. What freedom do you imagine you possess? The freedom to starve? The freedom to watch your sister's prospects wither because you are too stubborn to accept help when it is offered? Help? The word exploded from her like a gunshot. You offer me a business arrangement, not help. You look at me and see a problem to be solved, a box to be checked on your list of estate requirements. You do not even have the courtesy to explain why you need a wife so urgently, only that I should be grateful for the opportunity to become one of your possessions. You know nothing of my reasons, because you have not told me. Blythe's voice rose to match his, all her carefully maintained composure crumbling beneath the weight of his arrogance. You appear like some vengeful spirit, demanding I upend my entire life and offer me nothing but money in return. Did it never occur to you that I might want more? That I might deserve more? What you deserve, the Duke said coldly, is irrelevant. What you need is security. What I need is a wife. This is not a romantic fairy tale, Miss Vernon. This is reality. Then here is my reality, Your Grace. Blythe leaned forward, her voice dropping to something low and fierce. I would rather fail on my own terms than succeed on yours. I would rather face uncertainty with my dignity intact than spend my life as some transaction in your ledger. Now get out of my shop. The Duke's jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. You are making a catastrophic mistake. That is my right. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the counter, the air between them crackling with fury and something else Blythe could not name. Outside, the wind had risen to a howl that rattled the windows in their frames. Snow drove against the glass with the sound of thrown sand. The Duke finally turned toward the door, his movements rigid with anger. He grasped the handle and pulled. The door opened barely an inch before the wind slammed it shut again. He tried once more, throwing his considerable strength behind it. But the storm had intensified into something biblical. Through the window, Blythe could see nothing but white, a complete whiteout that had transformed the familiar village street into an alien landscape. Bloody hell, the Duke muttered, the first crack in his aristocratic composure. Blythe felt her stomach drop as understanding dawned. She moved to the window and wiped away the condensation, though it revealed nothing but the same impenetrable wall of snow. The wind screamed around the building's corners like a living thing. No one could travel in this. No one could even see 3 feet ahead. She turned back to find the Duke watching her, his expression unreadable. It appears, he said with terrible calm, that neither of us is going anywhere tonight. The words hung in the air between them like a sentence passed. Outside, the blizzard intensified, sealing them together in the small shop as effectively as prison walls. Blythe looked at her uninvited guest, this furious, impossible man who had invaded her life and disrupted her carefully maintained independence, and realized that Christmas Eve was about to become far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The Duke removed his snow-covered greatcoat with deliberate precision and draped it over a chair, his eyes never leaving hers. I suggest we declare a truce, Miss Vernon, at least until morning. Blythe wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how small the shop was, how alone they were, how very long a winter night could be. I suggest you remember, she said quietly, that you are here uninvited, Your Grace, and that my answer remains unchanged. His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. The night is young. We shall see. The silence that followed the Duke's pronouncement stretched thin and brittle as ice. Blythe stood frozen near the window while he occupied the space by the counter, both of them acutely aware that the small shop had suddenly become impossibly smaller. The storm continued its assault outside, wind howling down the chimney and sending sparks dancing in the modest fireplace. "Charlotte," Blythe said suddenly, her anger momentarily eclipsed by concern. "My sister was at the church. If she tried to come home in this, the vicarage is adjacent to the church." The Duke's voice had lost some of its edge. "If your sister has any sense, she will have remained there until the storm passes." "Of course she has sense," Blythe snapped, though his words had eased the tightness in her chest. Charlotte was sensible, and Reverend Palmer would never allow a young girl to venture out in such weather. She would be safe, warm, probably helping Mrs. Palmer prepare the Christmas service. Unlike some who ride out in blizzards to harass women who have already refused them. I left Vane Hall when there was merely snow, not a biblical plague. He moved closer to the fire, extending his hands toward the meager warmth. Even in the flickering light, he looked impossibly out of place. Too tall, too fine, too aristocratic for her shabby little shop with its worn floorboards and patched curtains. And I did not come to harass. I came for an answer, which you received a week ago. Blythe remained by the window, maintaining as much distance as the cramped space allowed. Your inability to accept it is not my concern. Everything about this situation is your concern. He turned to face her, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. The way he looked at her as if she were a puzzle he could solve through sheer force of will. You are being deliberately obtuse. I am offering you a solution to every problem that keeps you awake at night. Security, comfort, a future for your sister. All I ask in return is your name and your presence at necessary social functions. It is hardly an onerous exchange. To you, perhaps." Blythe crossed to the counter and began sorting through papers she had already organized, needing something to do with her hands. "You see only the transaction. You cannot comprehend what you are actually asking me to surrender. Then explain it to me." The challenge in his voice made her look up sharply. He had moved closer, separated from her now by only the width of the counter, his expression genuine for perhaps the first time since she had met him. "What is so valuable about this?" He gestured at the shop around them. "That you would choose it over security?" "My choice," Blythe said quietly. "It is mine, Your Grace. Every decision, every mistake, every small victory, they belong to me. When I fail on my own terms. When I succeed, however modest that success, I know I earned it. You are asking me to trade all of that for the privilege of being your dependent, your property. I am not asking you to be property." His jaw tightened. "You would have your own household, your own funds, doled out at your discretion." Blythe's voice sharpened. "Let us not pretend otherwise, Your Grace. You are accustomed to controlling everything in your sphere. I would become another asset to be managed, another piece on your chessboard. The fact that you cannot even see the difference between security and servitude tells me everything I need to know about what my life would become." "And your life now?" He leaned forward, his hands flat on the counter. "Working yourself to exhaustion in a failing enterprise? Wearing clothes that are more mending than original fabric? Lying awake calculating how many more weeks before you lose everything? This is the freedom you prize so highly?" "Yes," the word burst from her with surprising force. "Because it is honest. I am not deceiving myself about pretty cages and convenient arrangements. I know exactly what I face, and I face it with my eyes open and my will intact." "Your will." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Your will accomplishes nothing against creditors who care only for payment. against landlords who will evict you without a second thought, against a world that has no use for impoverished women with too much pride and too little sense. At least my pride is my own, Blythe shot back. What is yours, Your Grace? What do you own that you have actually earned, rather than inherited? You speak of my failures as if they diminish me, but at least they are mine. Can you say the same of your successes? His expression went cold and dangerous. You know nothing of what I have. Because you tell me nothing. Blythe slammed her palm on the counter, making him blink. You appear in my shop twice now, making demands and pronouncements, offering money as if it solves everything, and reveal not one true thing about yourself. You need a wife urgently enough to pursue a shopkeeper, but you will not say why. You speak of estate management as if it explains everything, but it explains nothing. You believe money buys everything, including people, and you are furious that I have proven you wrong. The Duke stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. You are remarkably insolent for a woman in your position. And you are remarkably arrogant for a man trapped in a snowstorm with no way home. For a moment, she thought he might explode. His hands curled into fists on the counter, his shoulders rigid with tension. Then, unexpectedly, he straightened and moved to the window, peering out into the white void beyond. How long do these storms typically last? His voice was carefully neutral. Hours? Sometimes days. Blythe watched him process this information, saw the moment he understood the full extent of their predicament. The village will be completely isolated until it passes. No one travels in weather like this. It would be suicide. He stood silent for a long moment, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its imperious edge. I will need to send word to Vane Hall. My staff will be concerned. No one is sending word anywhere tonight. Blythe moved to the door and cracked it open, allowing him to see the wall of white that had replaced the world beyond. Snow had already drifted halfway up the frame. The cold that blasted through made them both step back. She forced the door closed again, her arms aching from the effort. The Duke turned to face her, and she saw the moment he truly accepted their situation. They were trapped here, together, alone, for the entire night, possibly longer. Then, I suppose, he said slowly, we shall have to find a way to tolerate each other's company until morning. Blythe looked at this proud, impossible man standing in her humble shop, and felt the weight of the long night ahead settle over them both like the snow outside. I suppose we shall. The fire was dying. That mundane reality forced them into an uneasy truce born of necessity rather than goodwill. Blythe had precious little coal left, and what remained needed to last through what promised to be a brutally cold night. She knelt before the hearth, carefully adding small pieces to coax the flames higher, acutely aware of the Duke watching her every movement. You are doing that incorrectly, he said finally. Blythe's hand stilled. I beg your pardon? The coal. You are smothering it. He moved closer, then seemed to think better of it. You need to build a proper base first, allow for airflow. I have been tending fires for 18 months, Your Grace. I believe I can manage. Clearly not, or you would not be freezing in your own shop. His tone was matter-of-fact rather than cruel, which somehow made it worse. May I? She wanted to refuse on principle, but the cold was seeping through her dress, and the fire was indeed struggling. With poor grace, Blythe stood and stepped aside. By all means, demonstrate your superior understanding of coal, If he detected her sarcasm, he gave no sign. The Duke knelt before her fireplace, a duke, on his knees in a shopkeeper's establishment, and began rearranging the coal with surprising competence. His movements were efficient and practiced, not at all what she would have expected from a man who presumably had servants for such tasks. "You seem familiar with this work," she observed despite herself. "My father believed a man should understand every aspect of his holdings, from the finances to the fires." He added a larger piece of coal, positioning it precisely. "I spent a winter at our northern estate learning from the groundskeeper. Drafty old fortress. One learned to manage a fire properly, or one froze." He sat back on his heels, studying his work. Within moments, the flames caught properly, spreading warmth into the small space. Blythe stared at him, this aristocrat with coal dust on his hands, and felt her certainty waver slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. He stood, brushing off his hands, and their eyes met for a moment before both looked away. The silence that followed was different from before, less hostile, more uncertain. "I should prepare something for dinner," Blythe said, needing to break the tension. "It will not be what you are accustomed to, I am afraid." "I did not come here expecting a feast." He retreated to the chair near the counter, giving her space. Blythe moved to the small area behind the shop that served as her kitchen, grateful for something to occupy her hands. She had the plum cake intended for tomorrow, some bread from yesterday's, baking, a bit of cheese, and apples from the market. Humble fare, but honest. As she worked, she heard a soft mewing and turned to see Marmalade, the orange tabby that lived in the shop and kept the mice at bay, emerging from his hiding place beneath the shelves. The cat, normally friendly, took one look at the Duke and flattened his ears. "Marmalade, do not be rude," Blythe chided gently. "We have a guest, however unexpected." "I am not fond of cats," the Duke said, his tone suggesting this was a statement of fact rather than opinion. "How fortunate that Marmalade's approval is not required for your stay." Blythe scooped up the cat, who immediately began purring against her shoulder. "He is excellent company and earns his keep admirably." She expected a dismissive comment, so she was surprised when the Duke said nothing. When she glanced over, she found him watching her with an odd expression, something almost thoughtful in his pale eyes. A draft suddenly rattled the door, making them both start. The latch, already loose, came completely free and clattered to the floor. The door swung partially open, admitting a blast of frigid air and snow. Blythe set down Marmalade and rushed to force the door closed, but the broken latch made it impossible to secure. She was struggling with it when the Duke appeared beside her, adding his strength to keep the door shut against the wind. "Hold it," he commanded. "I will fix the latch." "With what tools?" "I have nothing." But he had already spotted the small box beneath the counter where she kept basic supplies. He retrieved it and examined the broken latch with the same focused attention he had given the fire. His long fingers worked quickly, using a nail to create a makeshift repair that, while not elegant, would hold. "There," he said, testing it. "It should last the night." Blythe stared at the repaired latch, then at him. "Where did you learn to do that?" "The same winter I learned about fires." He returned the tools to their box. "One cannot always wait for servants, Miss Vernon, particularly in emergencies." "I suppose not." She found herself reassessing him yet again, seeing past the aristocratic arrogance to something more complex beneath. "Thank you. Again." He nodded curtly and returned to his chair. Marmalade, apparently having decided the Duke was no longer a threat, padded over and began weaving between his boots. The Duke looked down at the cat with an expression of profound discomfort. "He will not harm you, Your Grace," Blythe said, unable to suppress a small smile. "I am aware." But he made no move to shoo the cat away, even when Marmalade began sharpening his claws on the Duke's expensive boots. Blythe brought the simple meal to the counter, and they sat on opposite sides, the barrier still between them, but feeling less absolute than before. They ate in silence for several minutes, before Blythe's curiosity overcame her resistance. "Why me?" she asked abruptly. The Duke looked up from his bread. "I beg your pardon? Why choose me for this arrangement of yours? Surely there are dozens of eligible women who would accept such an offer eagerly. Women of your own class, with proper connections and dowries." She set down her knife, meeting his gaze directly. "I am nobody. I have nothing to offer you. So why appear in my shop with your cold proposal? Why pursue me when I refused?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming once against the counter before stilling. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of honesty she had not heard from him before. "Because you are the only person I have ever met who was not seduced by my title." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. "Everyone wants something," he continued, his eyes fixed on hers. "My wealth, my influence, my name. They see the Duke, not the man. They calculate what I can provide, what doors I can open, what elevation I can offer. Even my own family." He stopped abruptly, something dark crossing his features. "But I refused you," Blythe said softly. "I still refuse you." "Yes." A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "You looked at everything I offered and found it wanting. Do you have any idea how extraordinary that is? How utterly unprecedented? So you pursue me because I wounded your pride?" "No." He leaned forward slightly. "I pursue you because you are the first honest person I have encountered in a decade. You want nothing from me, which means I can trust that any agreement between us would be exactly what it claims to be. No hidden ambitions, no secret schemes. Just," he gestured vaguely, "honesty." Blythe absorbed this, understanding dawning. "You do not want a wife. You want someone who will not use you. Is that so different?" "Yes," she said firmly. "One is a partnership. The other is merely a defensive position." His expression shuddered closed again, the moment of vulnerability passing. But Marmalade chose that instant to leap onto the Duke's lap, startling them both. The cat circled twice before settling with a contented purr. The Duke looked down at the creature as if it had personally betrayed him. "I told you, I do not like cats." "Marmalade is an excellent judge of character," Blythe said, fighting another smile. "Perhaps he sees something you refuse to show." The Duke's hand hovered uncertainly over the cat, then slowly, almost reluctantly, began to stroke the orange fur. Marmalade's purr intensified. "Traitor," the Duke muttered. But his hand continued its gentle motion. And despite everything, the arguments, the resentment, the impossible situation, Blythe felt something shift in the small room, like the first crack in a frozen lake announcing the coming thaw. The hours crept toward midnight, marked only by the steady tick of the shop's clock and the relentless howl of wind beyond the walls. They had retreated to opposite sides of the room again after their shared meal, the brief warmth of their exchange cooling into awkward silence. Blythe occupied herself mending a tear in one of Charlotte's stockings, while the Duke sat rigid in his chair, staring into the fire with Marmalade still inexplicably draped across his lap. "You must think me a monster," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. Blythe's needle paused mid-stitch. "I beg your pardon?" appearing uninvited, making demands, pursuing you despite your clear refusal. He did not look at her, his gaze fixed on the flames. It is the behavior of a villain in one of those Gothic novels my mother used to read. I think you arrogant, Blythe said carefully, accustomed to having your own way. But monster seems excessive. Yet you fear what I might make of your life. A cage, you called it. Now he did turn to face her, and something in his expression made her set down her mending. You are not entirely wrong. The admission surprised her. Your Grace. Gareth. The word came out rough, almost unwilling. If we are to spend the night trapped together, you might as well use my name. I am weary of titles. Gareth, she repeated, testing the shape of it. Very well. And you may call me Blythe, though I suspect formality is the only thing preventing us from murdering each other at present. That drew a short, unexpected laugh from him. Possibly. He was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking Marmalade's fur. I told you I needed a wife for estate management. That was not entirely truthful. Blythe waited, sensing that whatever was coming required patience. My father died 3 years ago, Gareth continued, his voice taking on the flat quality of someone reciting a painful history. His will was complicated. He had little faith in my ability to manage the duchy, given my age and unmarried state. So he included certain provisions. Protections, he called them. What sort of provisions? If I am not married by my 33rd birthday, control of the estate passes to a board of trustees until such time as I produce an heir. His jaw tightened. One of those trustees is my cousin, Lord Victor Ashford, a man who has spent the better part of 3 years positioning himself to exploit that very clause. Understanding began to dawn. When is your birthday? January the 2nd. The words fell like stones. I have 9 days, Blythe. 9 days to marry or watch everything my family built for 6 generations fall under the control of a man who will bleed it dry for his own advancement. Blythe set aside her mending entirely, her full attention on him now. Surely there must be some way to contest such a will. It seems unconscionably controlling. My father was a controlling man. Bitterness edged his tone. He believed love made one weak, vulnerable to manipulation. His own marriage to my mother was arranged, loveless, and served only to produce an heir. He wanted to ensure I would follow the same practical path. So, he forced your hand from beyond the grave. Yes. Gareth's hand stilled on the cat. Victor has been circling for months, spreading rumors about my unsuitability, my reckless independence. He has already begun courting the other trustees, promising them greater shares, easier access to estate funds. If he gains control, he will dismantle everything, sell off properties, dismiss staff who have served my family for generations. He cares nothing for legacy or responsibility, only profit. And you need a wife to prevent this. Blythe heard the softness in her own voice, felt her anger at his high-handedness beginning to transform into something more complicated. I need a wife who will not complicate matters further. He finally looked at her fully. Do you understand now why I cannot afford romance? Why I sought someone practical? Someone who would not expect love or passion or any of the pretty lies society tells about marriage. I have 9 days to satisfy a legal requirement. That is all. That is not all, Blythe said quietly. You are carrying the weight of hundreds of people's livelihoods. The responsibility of preserving something larger than yourself. That is not nothing, Gareth. He stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign tongue. You are the first person to understand that. Am I? She rose and moved closer to the fire, closer to him. Or am I simply the first person you have actually explained it to? I told you. Everyone wants something from me. If they knew the true extent of my desperation, they would use it as leverage. Demand more, expect more. His voice dropped. My father taught me that trust is a luxury I cannot afford. Your father, Blythe said gently, sounds like he was very lonely. Gareth flinched as if she had struck him. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze returning to the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. When I was 12, I thought myself in love with the daughter of a neighboring estate, sweet girl. Laughed at my jokes, smiled when I entered a room. I wrote her terrible poetry and picked flowers like a fool. His mouth twisted. My father discovered it, invited her family to dinner, made me watch while he negotiated her betrothal to a much older, much wealthier earl. She never looked at me again. Gareth, he was teaching me a lesson, showing me what love was worth in our world. I learned it well. He looked down at Marmalade, still purring obliviously in his lap. Every woman I have encountered since has proven him right. They see the title, the wealth, the power. Never the man beneath. Never just me. The vulnerability in his voice pierced through Blythe's remaining defenses. She saw him clearly now, not the arrogant duke who had invaded her shop, but a man who had been taught from childhood that his only value lay in what he possessed, never in who he was. I am sorry, she said, and meant it. That is a terrible way to live. It is the only way I know. He met her eyes. Which is why I chose you. You refused me when I offered you everything. You saw through the title to the transaction beneath and found it insulting. Do you have any idea what that meant to me? To meet someone who valued their independence more than my wealth? So you pursued me. So I pursued you. Poorly, I admit. A shadow of self-awareness crossed his features. I am not accustomed to asking, Blythe, only commanding. It is a failing. It is, she agreed, but without heat. She understood now. The arrogance was armor, the demands a defense against a world that had taught him to trust nothing and no one. I cannot offer you love, he said, his voice steady but his eyes almost pleading. I do not know if I am capable of it anymore. But I can offer you honesty, respect, a partnership built on mutual benefit and clear terms. Is that truly so terrible a thing? Blythe looked at this man who sat in her shabby shop with a cat in his lap and coal dust on his fine clothes, who had just revealed the scars his father had left on his soul, and felt something in her chest tighten painfully. No, she said softly. It is not terrible. It is simply sad. He absorbed this, something flickering in his expression. Sad? That you would settle for so little when you deserve so much more. For a moment she thought he might argue. Instead he looked away, his throat working. Outside the storm continued its assault. But inside the small shop, something had fundamentally shifted. The space between them no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a threshold. 9 days, Gareth said finally. That is all I have left. Will you at least consider it? Not for me. For the people who depend on the estate. For the legacy my father tried to control, but that Victor will destroy. Blythe returned to her chair, her mind spinning. Everything had changed with his confession. He was no longer her enemy, but a man trapped by circumstances as desperate as her own, fighting to protect something larger than himself. "I will consider it," she heard herself say. "I make no promises, but I will think on what you have told me." The relief that washed over his features was almost painful to witness. "Thank you." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different silence than before, weighted not with hostility, but with possibility and the strange intimacy of shared secrets. Outside, Christmas drew closer with each passing moment, and inside, two people who had been strangers began the tentative, terrifying process of becoming something more. Blythe woke to find pale winter light filtering through the frost-covered windows, and Gareth asleep in the chair by the fire, his head tilted at an angle that would surely leave his neck aching. Marmalade had abandoned him sometime in the night, and now pressed against Blythe's side, a warm purring weight. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline silence. Christmas morning. She had never imagined spending it like this, snowbound with a duke who had proposed a loveless marriage and then revealed a heart more wounded than her own. Gareth stirred, his eyes opening slowly. For a moment, before full awareness returned, his expression was unguarded, vulnerable and young. Then recognition settled in, and the familiar walls began to rise. "Do not," Blythe said softly. "Not today." He blinked at her. "I beg your pardon?" "Do not retreat behind your armor. Not on Christmas." She rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. "If we are trapped here another day, let us at least observe the holiday properly. A truce, remember?" "I am not certain I know how," he admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The gesture made him look remarkably human. "Then I shall teach you." She moved to the small box of decorations she had prepared before his arrival, sprigs of holly, ivy, a few precious ribbons saved from better years. "First, we decorate." Gareth watched with bemusement as she began draping greenery along the counter. "Surely this is not necessary." "It is entirely necessary. It is Christmas." She held out a ribbon to him. "Here, make yourself useful. I am a duke, not a servant. Today, you are simply Gareth, and Gareth is going to help me make this place festive." She pressed the ribbon into his hand. "Unless you are admitting defeat?" That sparked something in his eyes, a glimmer of challenge. "I never admit defeat." What followed was perhaps the most absurd hour of Blythe's life. Gareth proved to have no natural talent for decoration, hanging the ivy at awkward angles and tying ribbons with the grim determination of a general planning a siege. But he tried. And there was something endearing about watching this powerful man struggle with simple Christmas greenery. "No, not like that," Blythe said, laughing as his latest attempt resulted in the entire strand of ivy falling to the floor. "You must secure it first before draping." "This is unnecessarily complicated." "This is called joy, Your Grace. I realize it may be a foreign concept." He shot her a look that might have been stern, but for the slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "You are enjoying my incompetence?" "Immensely." She rescued the ivy and demonstrated the proper technique. "There, you see?" He tried again, this time with more success. When the greenery stayed in place, he looked absurdly pleased with himself. "I did it." "You did." Blythe found herself smiling at his boyish pride. "At this rate, you will be a master decorator by next Christmas." The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications neither was quite ready to examine. Next Christmas. Together. By noon, the shop had been transformed into something approaching festive. The decorations were humble, but they caught the winter light and filled the space with the scent of pine and possibility. Blythe prepared their Christmas dinner, the plum cake, cold chicken she had been saving, bread and cheese, and wassail made from her carefully hoarded spices. They sat together at the counter, the barrier between them now serving as a shared table rather than a dividing line. Gareth tasted the wassail, and his eyebrows rose in surprise. "This is excellent. You sound shocked that a mere shopkeeper can cook. I am shocked that anything so simple can taste so complex." He took another sip, savoring it. "My chef uses dozens of ingredients and achieves less flavor, because he is trying to impress rather than nourish." Blythe cut into the plum cake. "My mother taught me that the best meals are made with love, not expense." "Love." Gareth said the word as if testing its weight. "You believe in it, then? Despite everything you have seen?" "Of course." She met his gaze directly. "Why would I not? Your father died and left you in debt. Your circumstances forced you to sacrifice your own prospects to protect your sister. Love has brought you little but hardship. Love brought me the knowledge that I was cherished, that my father believed in me enough to trust me with his legacy, however flawed, that my sister and I would face anything together." She set down her fork. "Love is not measured in ease, Gareth. It is measured in meaning." He was quiet for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. "I envy you that certainty. You could have it too, if you allowed yourself." "Could I?" His voice dropped. "Or have I been too long in the cold to remember warmth?" The vulnerability in his question pierced her. Without thinking, Blythe reached across the counter and placed her hand over his. "You remembered enough to fix my latch last night, to tend my fire, to sit with a cat you claimed to dislike simply because it needed comfort." His hand turned beneath hers, his fingers curling around hers with unexpected gentleness. "You see things in me I am not certain exist. I see what you hide." Her thumb traced across his knuckles. "The question is whether you are brave enough to let it show." The air between them shifted, charged with something neither had anticipated. Gareth's gaze dropped to their joined hands, then rose to her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Blythe," he said, her name rough in his throat. "I should not what?" Instead of answering, he stood and moved around the counter, eliminating the barrier that had separated them all this time. He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his pale eyes, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with careful, controlled breaths. "I came here demanding an answer to a practical question," he said quietly. "But somewhere between your refusal and your wassail, the question changed." "Changed how?" Her voice emerged barely above a whisper. "I no longer know if I want you to marry me out of necessity or something far more dangerous." Before she could respond, before she could think, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was nothing like the cold transaction he had proposed. His mouth was warm and questioning, seeking rather than demanding, and Blythe felt something ignite low in her belly. Her hands rose of their own accord, grasping the front of his waistcoat as she kissed him back with equal hunger. This was madness. This was everything she had sworn to protect herself against. Yet when his arms came around her, pulling her closer, she melted into him as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gareth pressed his forehead to hers. That was not part of the arrangement. "No," Blythe agreed, her hand still fisted in his waistcoat. "It was not. We should forget it happened. Maintain the pragmatic nature of our discussion." "We should," she said. but neither of them moved. Gareth's thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I am trying very hard to be honorable here, Blythe. To offer you only what I promised, a partnership, nothing more. But you are making it remarkably difficult." "Good." The word came out fierce and sure. She rose on her toes and kissed him again, claiming rather than yielding, and felt him shudder against her. This kiss was deeper, more urgent. His hands slid into her hair, scattering pins, while hers explored the broad plane of his shoulders, the strong column of his neck. When his mouth left hers to trail heat along her jaw, she gasped, "Gareth, tell me to stop." His voice was ragged. "Tell me this is not what you want, and I will walk away." But Blythe could not form the words, because it was exactly what she wanted. This heat, this need, this man who had somehow transformed from enemy to something infinitely more dangerous in the space of a single snowbound night. "I cannot," she whispered against his mouth. "God help me, I cannot." His response was to kiss her with renewed intensity, backing her against the counter, his body a wall of heat and want. They were playing with fire, shattering every careful boundary he had proposed. But neither could stop. Finally, with what seemed to cost him enormous effort, Gareth pulled back. They stood inches apart, both trembling, both changed. "This complicates things," he said, his voice hoarse. "Yes." Blythe touched her lips, still burning from his kiss. "Yes, it rather does." Outside, the Christmas sun continued its arc across the pristine snow, marking the passage of a day that had transformed everything neither of them had been prepared to feel. Dawn broke on the day after Christmas with painful clarity. The storm had passed completely, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white and uncomfortable silence. Blythe woke in the small room above the shop where she had finally retreated sometime after midnight, her lips still tender from kisses that had grown increasingly desperate before Gareth had forced himself to stop, to retreat to his chair downstairs, with a gentleman's restraint that had left them both aching. She dressed slowly, her hands unsteady as she pinned her hair. Everything had changed. The practical arrangement he had proposed was now impossible. One could not kiss someone with that much passion and then proceed with cold indifference. Yet the circumstances that had driven him to her door remained unchanged. He still needed a wife in 7 days. She still faced ruin without help. When she descended the stairs, she found Gareth already awake, standing by the window with his back to her. He had clearly attempted to restore some order to his appearance, but his coat was rumpled and his hair still bore the marks of her fingers. At the sound of her footstep, he turned, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Blythe." Her name was a question, a plea, an apology all at once. "Gareth." She stopped at the base of the stairs, suddenly uncertain. In the clear light of morning, with the fever of their kisses faded, reality pressed in from all sides. "We need to talk about what happened." He moved toward her, but stopped short, maintaining careful distance. "About what it means? Does it have to mean anything?" The words emerged more defensive than she intended. Perhaps it was simply two people trapped together, seeking comfort during a difficult time. His expression hardened. "Is that truly what you believe?" "I do not know what I believe." Blythe wrapped her arms around herself. "Yesterday, I was ready to refuse you again. Now I have compromised myself thoroughly, and I do not know whether my judgment is sound or simply clouded by—" She stopped, unable to name the feelings churning through her. "Desire," Gareth finished quietly. "You can say it, Blythe." We desired each other. We acted on it. That does not make you weak or your judgment flawed. Does it not? She moved to the counter, needing something solid beneath her hands. How can I make a rational decision about marriage when every time I look at you, I remember how your mouth felt against mine? The same way I am trying to make rational decisions while remembering how you tasted. His voice was rough with honesty. We are both struggling with this, but that does not mean we cannot move forward. Forward to what? She turned to face him fully. Your practical arrangement is shattered, Gareth. You cannot kiss someone like that and then expect a marriage of mere convenience. No. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. No, I cannot. Which is why I am proposing something different. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What? A genuine partnership. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Not a cold transaction. Not a business arrangement. An honest marriage between 2 people who are attracted to each other and might, given time, become something more. Might become, Blythe repeated. But you said you could not offer love. I said I did not know if I was capable of it. That is not the same as refusing to try. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You have shown me things I thought long dead. Joy in simple decorations, the pleasure of honest conversation, the possibility that someone might want me rather than my title. I cannot promise you love, Blythe, but I can promise you that I will try to deserve it. The words struck something deep in her chest. She looked at their joined hands, at this man who had been taught that trust was weakness and love was leverage, and made her decision. Then I have terms, she said firmly. Surprise flickered across his features. Terms? If we are to be partners, then I will be treated as one. She pulled her hand free and straightened her shoulders. I want a role in the estate's finances. Not simply an allowance to manage, but actual involvement in the decisions. I want to understand the holdings, the investments, the responsibilities. Done. No hesitation. I want my sister provided for, but not as charity. She should have education, opportunities, a proper introduction to society if she wishes it. Of course. And I want my independence preserved. This was the crucial part, and she watched his face carefully. I will not be locked away in some country manor, producing heirs and managing servants. I want to maintain some aspect of my own work, my own purpose beyond being your duchess. Gareth was quiet for a moment, considering. What did you have in mind? I do not know yet. Blythe's honesty surprised even herself. But I need to know that when I discover it, you will not forbid it simply because it is unconventional. I would never forbid you anything. He stepped closer, his expression intense. Blythe, I am not seeking a decorative wife to display at social functions. I want a partner who challenges me, who sees the world differently than I do, who will tell me when I am being an arrogant fool. That will happen frequently, she said, fighting a smile. I am counting on it. He reached for her again, and this time she let him pull her close. The roads should be passable by this afternoon. Come with me to the hunting lodge. It is small, private, only a few miles from here. We can formalize the engagement there, plan how to present this to society, and, he paused, color rising slightly in his cheeks, and spend time learning each other properly before we marry. Learning each other, Blythe repeated, heat flooding through her at the implication. Yes. His voice dropped to something intimate and promising. I want to court you, Blythe. Properly. I want to learn what makes you laugh, what you fear, what you dream about. I want to earn your trust before I claim your hand. We have 7 days. Then we shall make them count." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers up her arm. "Say yes, not because you are desperate or I am demanding, but because you want to see what we might become." Blythe looked into his pale eyes and saw genuine hope there, fragile and new. This man who had learned to trust nothing was offering her everything he had: his honesty, his vulnerability, his tentative faith in something neither of them fully understood yet. "Yes," she said, and watched wonder bloom across his features. "But Gareth, if you ever try to buy me again, or treat me as property, or forget that I chose you freely, you will leave me." He said it with certainty, as you should. "I want you to choose me every day, Blythe. Not once at the altar, but continuously, consciously, because I have proven myself worthy of that choice." That is a very fine speech for a man who proposed a loveless marriage 3 days ago. 3 days ago I had not been kissed senseless by a stubborn shopkeeper who makes extraordinary wassail. He pulled her closer still, until their bodies aligned and she could feel his heart beating against hers. "I am a quick learner when properly motivated." "Then learn this." She rose on her toes and kissed him, claiming the moment for herself. "I will be your partner, Gareth. Your equal, not your possession." "My equal," he agreed against her mouth. "God help me, but I would not have it any other way." Outside, the village was beginning to stir. Voices calling greetings across the snow, the sound of shovels scraping pathways clear. Life resuming after the storm. Inside the small shop, 2 people who had been enemies stood wrapped in each other's arms, planning a future neither had imagined possible. "I should tell Charlotte," Blythe said reluctantly, though she made no move to pull away. "She will be beside herself with worry. And I should send word to Vane Hall before my staff sends out a search party." He pressed one more kiss to her forehead before releasing her. "We shall do what we must, and then we begin our partnership properly." 7 days, Blythe reminded him, to plan a wedding, face society, and convince your scheming cousin that this is a love match rather than desperation. "It will be both," Gareth said quietly. "I came to you desperate, yes. But what I am beginning to feel has nothing to do with necessity." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. "We are either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. "But I find I no longer care which, as long as we are it together." The hunting lodge was everything Gareth had promised: intimate, warm, and blissfully private. Blythe had spent 3 days there learning the contours of her future husband's mind and mouth in equal measure. Their conversations ranging from estate management to childhood dreams, punctuated by kisses that grew increasingly difficult to stop. Charlotte, installed in the guest room after her initial shock had transformed into delighted approval, served as their somewhat inadequate chaperone, though she had a convenient tendency to disappear whenever the tension between Blythe and Gareth grew too heated. They had just finished reviewing the estate ledgers. Gareth had been true to his word about partnership, when the sound of approaching horses shattered their peaceful afternoon. Gareth rose from the desk, his expression darkening as he moved to the window. Bloody hell. The curse was low and vicious. "Victor." Blythe joined him at the window and saw a sleek black carriage drawing to a halt before the lodge, its occupant clearly visible through the glass. Lord Victor Ashford was handsome in a practiced way, his features too perfect, his smile too calculated. Even from a distance, she could sense the predatory intelligence in his movements as he descended from the carriage. "How did he know we were here?" Blythe asked. "He makes it his business to know everything." Gareth's jaw tightened. This is no social call. He has come to assess the threat to his ambitions. Then we shall show him exactly how significant that threat is. Blythe straightened her spine, reaching for the same fierce pride that had allowed her to refuse a duke in her failing shop. "He wants to see your bride? Let him see her." Gareth turned to her, something fierce and protective blazing in his eyes. "He will try to undermine you. Question your suitability, your origins, your motives. Victor fights dirty. So can I." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "We are partners, remember? Let us act like it." The knock came moments later, imperious and demanding. Gareth squeezed her hand once before releasing it and moving to answer the door himself. A deliberate breach of protocol that made his message clear. This was his private domain, not a formal receiving room. "Victor." Gareth's voice was cold as winter stone. What an unexpected intrusion. "Cousin." Lord Ashford stepped inside without invitation, his gaze sweeping the cozy lodge with barely concealed disdain before landing on Blythe. "I heard the most extraordinary rumors and simply had to investigate personally. They say you have taken a bride. How remarkably sudden. May I present my fiancée, Miss Blythe Vernon." Gareth moved to Blythe's side with deliberate possessiveness. "Blythe, my cousin, Lord Victor Ashford." Blythe extended her hand with practiced grace, noting how Victor's eyes sharpened with assessment as he took in her simple but well-made dress, her lack of jewels, her unremarkable appearance. She could see him cataloging her inadequacies, preparing his attack. "Miss Vernon?" Victor's smile was all teeth. "How delightful. Though I must confess, I am unfamiliar with your family." "The Vernons of—" "No family of consequence, I am afraid." Blythe withdrew her hand. "My father was a baker. I run his shop in the village." The shock on Victor's face would have been comical if it were not so calculated. "A shopkeeper. How unconventional." "Gareth, surely you jest." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." Gareth's arm came around Blythe's waist, pulling her against his side with unmistakable intimacy. "Blythe has agreed to be my wife. We plan to marry before the new year." "How convenient." Victor's eyes glittered with malice. "Given the terms of your father's will. One might almost think this hasty engagement was born of desperation rather than affection." "One would be wrong." Blythe spoke before Gareth could respond, her voice clear and steady. "Though I understand why you might struggle to recognize genuine feeling, Lord Ashford. It must be foreign to a man who views everything through the lens of opportunity." Victor's smile froze. "I beg your pardon? You came here to assess whether our engagement is real or merely a legal maneuver." Blythe moved closer to him, her chin raised. "Let me save you the trouble of your investigation. It is both. Gareth needed a wife. I needed security. But somewhere between his proposal and my acceptance, something rather inconvenient happened. We fell in love." The lie came out smooth as silk, and she felt Gareth tense beside her before he caught her meaning. This was performance, battle, the theatrical display they needed to send Victor away, defeated. "Love," Victor repeated with open skepticism. "In a matter of days?" "Forgive me if I find that rather difficult to believe." "Believe what you will." Gareth's voice was low and dangerous. But question my devotion to Blythe again, and you will find yourself removed from this property by force." "Such passion," Victor drawled, though uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. "One might almost think it genuine. Tell me, Miss Vernon, what is it that attracted you to my cousin? His charming personality? Or perhaps the fact that he is the wealthiest duke in England?" "His hands," Blythe said immediately, and saw both men blink in surprise. She turned to Gareth, allowing real feeling to color her voice as she remembered him fixing her latch, tending her fire, stroking Marmalade with unexpected gentleness. "I fell in love with his hands first. The way they move when he is thinking through a problem. The tenderness in them when he thinks no one is watching. The strength and the surprising delicacy." She reached up and cupped Gareth's face, seeing understanding dawn in his eyes. "Then I fell in love with the way he listens when I speak, as if my words actually matter. The way he challenges me without diminishing me. The way he looks at me as if I am the only person in the world worth seeing. Blythe." Gareth's voice was rough with genuine emotion now. "I fell in love with the man beneath the title," she continued, holding his gaze. "The one who was taught that trust is weakness, but is learning to be brave. The one who sat in my shabby shop with a cat in his lap and revealed his heart to a woman who had every reason to refuse. Him." She turned back to Victor. "So yes, Lord Ashford, I love him. Desperately, completely, and nothing you say will change that." Gareth pulled her against him and kissed her with an intensity that made Victor cough uncomfortably. This was no chaste display for show. This was heat and hunger and genuine need, and Blythe met it with equal fervor, pouring every confused feeling of the past days into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor's expression had shifted from smug certainty to frustrated confusion. "How touching," he managed, but the words lacked conviction. "Though I must point out that a hasty marriage to a woman of no family or fortune does raise questions about judgment, Gareth. The trustees may have concerns." "The trustees," Gareth said with deadly calm, "have no say in whom I marry. Only whether I marry at all. And I assure you, cousin, I will be thoroughly, legally wed before my birthday. Your schemes end here." "We shall see." Victor retrieved his gloves with sharp, angry movements. "Society will have much to say about this match, a duke and a shopkeeper. It will be quite the scandal. Let them talk." Blythe stepped forward, done with playing defense. "I am not ashamed of what I am or where I come from, Lord Ashford. And any man who would use gossip and legal manipulation to steal what is not rightfully his should perhaps examine his own character before questioning others." Victor's face flushed with anger. "You know nothing of the situation. I know that Gareth has spent 3 years faithfully managing an estate you have contributed nothing to beyond schemes and rumors." Her voice was steel beneath silk. "I know that hundreds of people depend on his leadership and would suffer under yours. And I know that you came here hoping to find weakness, but instead found exactly what you feared. A united front that will not be moved by your threats or implications." For a long moment, Victor simply stared at her, reassessing. Then his gaze cut to Gareth. "You have chosen quite the champion, cousin." "I have chosen my partner," Gareth corrected. "Now I suggest you leave. You have a long ride back to London, and I have wedding arrangements to finalize." Victor moved toward the door but paused on the threshold. "This is not over." "Yes," Gareth said quietly, his arm tightening around Blythe. "It is. You lost the moment you underestimated her." They watched through the window as Victor's carriage departed, wheels cutting angry tracks through the snow. Only when it disappeared from sight did Blythe allow herself to sag against Gareth, her knees suddenly weak. "That was terrifying," she admitted. "That was magnificent." Gareth turned her to face him, his expression awed. "You eviscerated him with perfect courtesy. I have never seen Victor so thoroughly outmaneuvered." "I meant what I said." The words came out quietly. "About your hands, about the way you listen. It was not entirely performance, Gareth." His expression softened into something that made her heart ache. "I know." Neither was my response. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I thought I was choosing a convenient bride. But you have become so much more than that." "We are in dangerous territory," Blythe whispered. "I know." He kissed her softly, reverently, but I find I no longer want to retreat to safety. Outside, the winter sun began its descent, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Inside, two people who had begun as adversaries stood wrapped in each other's arms, having just fought their first battle together and won. New Year's Eve arrived with crystalline clarity, the sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the snow finally beginning its slow retreat beneath the winter sun. They had 3 days until the wedding, a small private ceremony that would satisfy the legal requirements while allowing them to plan a proper celebration later, once society had been prepared for the shock of a duke marrying a shopkeeper. Charlotte had returned to the village that morning with a purse full of coins to settle Blythe's debts and close the shop temporarily, her romantic heart nearly bursting with joy at the unexpected turn of events. The hunting lodge felt vast in her absence, and Blythe found herself wandering its rooms restlessly, her mind unable to settle on any single thought. She ended up in the library, drawn by the warmth of the fire and the floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound volumes. This room, more than any other, revealed Gareth's true nature. The books were arranged not by size or aesthetics, but by subject and frequency of use, many showing the worn spines of beloved companions. Poetry sat beside agricultural treatises, philosophy next to romantic novels he would likely deny owning. "I wondered where you had gone." Gareth's voice came from the doorway, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, equal parts tenderness and uncertainty, as if he still could not quite believe she was real. "Your library is remarkable," she said, running her fingers along a shelf. "I could spend years here and not exhaust the treasures." "Then I hope you will." He moved into the room, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "Blythe, we need to talk." Her heart stumbled. Those words, spoken in that tone, rarely preceded anything good. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous. Necessary." He gestured to the chairs before the fire, and she settled into one while he took the other, though he immediately abandoned it to pace before the hearth. "In 3 days, we marry. In 4 days, I satisfy the terms of my father's will and secure the estate. Victor's threat ends, your debts are resolved, everything proceeds according to plan." "Yes," Blythe said carefully, watching him prowl the space like a caged animal. "That was the agreement." "The agreement." He stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. "That cursed, practical, bloodless agreement that I proposed in your shop like a man negotiating the purchase of livestock." "Gareth, let me finish." He moved closer, dropping to his knees before her chair so their eyes were level. The position was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that it stole her breath. "I came to you offering a transaction, marriage in exchange for security. A loveless arrangement to solve both our problems. Do you remember? I am not likely to forget being proposed to like a business merger." "No, I imagine not." His hands rested on the arms of her chair, caging her without touching. I was so certain I had found the perfect solution. A woman who would not expect love because I was incapable of providing it. Who would accept the cold reality of our arrangement without romantic delusions? You were wrong about that, Blythe said quietly. I never accepted your cold reality. No, you did not. You challenged me at every turn, refused my money, questioned my arrogance, forced me to explain myself when I was accustomed to simply being obeyed. A smile ghosted across his lips. You were the most infuriating woman I had ever encountered. Were? She arched an eyebrow. Past tense? Are, he corrected. You are still infuriating. But somewhere between your refusal and your wassail, between decorating for Christmas and kissing you senseless, something shifted inside me. Something I thought had died years ago. Blythe's hands trembled in her lap. What shifted? Hope. The word came out raw and honest. The possibility that I might deserve more than the cold existence my father mapped out for me. That someone might see past the title and the wealth to the man beneath and find him worth knowing. Gareth, I am in love with you. The confession burst from him like a dam breaking. Desperately, completely, impossibly in love with you. With your pride and your passion and the way you look at me, as if I am capable of being better than I believe myself to be. With your kindness to your sister and your cat, and even to me, when I deserved nothing but your scorn. Tears pricked Blythe's eyes. You said you could not offer love. I was wrong. He reached up and cupped her face with shaking hands. I was so wrong, Blythe. I never truly lived until I met you. I existed, I managed, I fulfilled my duties, but I did not live. You taught me what it means to feel joy in simple things, to trust without fear, to hope for something more than mere survival. I was so angry with you, she whispered. That first night, when you appeared demanding an answer. You had every right to be. I was an arrogant fool who thought he could command your compliance. His thumb traced her cheekbone, catching a tear. But even then, beneath the anger, I think I knew. This fierce, proud woman who would rather fail on her own terms than succeed on mine. She was going to change everything. I did not want to love you. The admission felt like surrender and victory at once. You represented everything I had fought against. Dependence, loss of control, becoming someone's possession. And now? Now I understand that love is not possession, but partnership. That choosing you does not diminish me, but completes me. She covered his hands with hers. I love you, Gareth. Not your title, not your wealth, not even the security you offer. Just you. The man who fixes latches and tends fires and pets cats he claims to dislike. His eyes closed briefly, his expression one of such profound relief it made her chest ache. When he opened them again, they shone with unshed tears. Then let me ask you properly. He drew back slightly, maintaining the kneeling position. Not as a duke making demands, not as a desperate man offering transactions, but as Gareth Vane, a man who has somehow been given the greatest gift he never knew he needed. Gareth, you have already proposed. That proposal was wrong. All of it. He took her hands in his, holding them as if they were something precious and fragile. Blythe Vernon, will you marry me? Not to save my estate or clear your debts or satisfy any legal requirement. Marry me because you love me, as I love you. Because you want to spend your life challenging my assumptions and teaching me to see the world through your eyes. Because together we are stronger, braver, more alive than either of us could be alone. Yes. The word came out choked with tears and laughter. Yes. You impossible, wonderful, infuriating man. Yes. He pulled her from the chair and into his arms, kissing her with a reverence that quickly gave way to passion. They sank together to the carpet before the fire, a tangle of limbs and whispered promises, everything proper abandoned in favor of honest feeling. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathless, Gareth traced her face as if memorizing it. I have nothing to offer you but myself. No calculations, no arrangements, just my heart, however damaged it may be. Your heart is perfect, Blythe said fiercely, scarred and wary and brave enough to try again despite every lesson you were taught. It is exactly the heart I choose. We marry in 3 days, he said, wonder coloring his voice. And this time it will be for all the right reasons. Love, Blythe agreed, pressing a kiss to his jaw. Partnership. The belief that two people who began as enemies can become each other's greatest advocates. And passion, Gareth added with a wicked smile, pulling her closer. Do not forget passion. Never. She kissed him again, deep and claiming. Though we should probably relocate this passion to somewhere more appropriate before Charlotte returns and has apoplexy. Probably. But neither of them moved, content to remain tangled together before the fire as the winter afternoon faded toward evening. Outside, the village prepared for the new year with church bells and quiet celebrations. Inside the hunting lodge, a duke and shopkeeper held each other close, having transformed a Christmas offer born of desperation into something far more precious, a promise of love that would outlast every season to come. Thank you, Gareth whispered against her hair. For what? For refusing me that first night. For being too proud and too stubborn to accept anything less than what we both deserved. He pulled back to meet her eyes. For teaching me that the best things in life cannot be bought or commanded, only freely given. Then consider me freely given, Blythe said, her voice thick with emotion. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. Yours. Because I choose to be. And I am yours, he vowed, not by necessity or arrangement, but by the grace of a Christmas snowstorm and a woman brave enough to demand more. They kissed again as the fire crackled beside them and the future spread out before them like fresh snow, clean, bright, and full of infinite possibility. The Duke's Christmas offer had been refused, rejected, and finally accepted, but only after it had been transformed from cold transaction into timeless love. And in the end, that made all the difference. Gareth and Blythe got their happily ever after because they chose each other. Now it's your turn to make a choice. If this story made you feel anything, joy, tears, that warm flutter in your chest, then someone else deserves to feel it too. Share this video with one person who needs a reminder that love is possible. And if you haven't subscribed yet, honestly, what are you waiting for? Another snowstorm? The channel is free, the stories are endless, and your subscribe button is lonely. Don't leave it waiting like Blythe left the Duke. Click it now, and I'll see you in the next love story. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.